We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Dalet Amud Beis in Mesechet Kesubos. This is Kesubos Daf 34b. The Gemara here continues. Rabbi Meir, even though Rabbi Meir in the Brisa, according to this approach in the Gemara, Rabbi Meir in the Brisa is talking about a situation where he himself did the shechita on Shabbos of the animal, or he himself did the shechita and shechted the animal for avodah zarah, and therefore the person is chayev misa. Still, Rabbi Meir says the person can also be chayev arba v'chamisha. Talking about a case of a stolen animal, he can also be chayev to pay the knas of 4 or 5 times the amount. But for Rabbi Meir, loka mishalem islay, but nevertheless, Rabbi Meir in general holds you could get malchus and pay, but meisu mishalem leslay, but in general, Rabbi Meir holds you do not get misa and pay. And again, that explains why in a situation where a person rapes his daughter, so in that case, he is not going to pay the fine because he's chayev misa. But over here, it's different. V'shani hani, but it's different over here when you're talking about the payment of 4 and 5 times the amount. The chiddush hu shechid shetorah b'knas. There's a special chiddush the Torah has when it comes to fines. Af agav de mikdal, even though the person is chayev misa, mishalim, he still has to pay. So in other words, the Gemara is saying this case of arba v'chamisha is an exception, and it will not reflect on the case that we're talking about over here when a person, let's say, rapes his daughter. It will have no reflection on that particular case. Rashi over here says, Rabbi Meir ba'alma b'tashlume mammon leslei mesu mishalim. In other words, the Gemara is saying that according to Rabbi Meir, in general, if you pay money, you don't get the chayev misa and pay money. V'hacha tashlume arba v'chamisha knaseim. But here we're talking about the payment of 4 or 5 times the amount, which is a knas, a fine. V'chol mishpat knas chidushu. Anytime you're dealing with a knas, it's a chidush. Hilkach afagav de miktal nami lo mifter minei. Therefore, even though he has the death penalty, he's not patur, he has to pay the knas. Now Rashi points out that later on we will ask on this answer. We're going to ask later on, according to this answer of Rabbah, according to Rabbi Meir, Kasha Bito Demasisim, we still have a question from the case where a person rapes his daughter in the Mishnah, because Nami Kanasu, that case is also a fine, it's a Kanas. The whole discussion started because you're patur in that case of paying the Kanas by the case of the daughter, and therefore this really doesn't answer the question that the Gemara will deal with later. But in any case, the point of the Gemara here is by knas, it is possible to pay even though you have the death penalty, even though that is not going to be true in general. And the Gemara continues, Va'azda Rabba l'taime. This idea over here that by knas it is different, Rabba follows his reasoning. Diyamar Rabba, because Rabba said as follows. For example, the following case: Haya gedi gonav lo v'tavcho b'Shabbos. Let's say he had a gedi that was already stolen from before Shabbos, and then he goes ahead and he shechts it on Shabbos. So in that case, chayiv. In that case, he's actually chayiv to pay 4 or 5 times the amount. Because on the Geneva part he was already chayiv before Shabbos, and now he has a situation where he's just shechting it on Shabbos, so he's chayiv misa, and to be chayiv misa and chayiv knas, that is possible. However, Rabba contrasts the following. Ganav v'tavach b'Shabbos patur. Let's say he does the stealing and the slaughtering on Shabbos, then he's patur. Now, on the Geneva part, that also involves a violation of Shabbos, but that is not a knas. That is a payment of mammon, and the payment of mammon you're not going to have if you have a violation of Shabbos, and once you don't pay the mammon, you will not pay the fine as well. Shem ein Geneva, ein tvicha, because if you didn't steal it, you can't be chayiv for slaughtering it, ve'ein mechira, or selling it, and therefore without the payment of the Geneva, there is no payment of the tvicha or the mechira, and therefore in that case you will be exempt because of the fact that you have the death penalty. So you see that if all there is a fine, you do pay the fine even though you have the death penalty. And the Gemara continues along the same lines. V'yamar Rabba, and Rabba says, Haya gedi gonav lo. Again, the same idea. Let's say he already stole the gedi, v'tavcha b'machteres, and then he does the shchita in a machteres. Means the same machteres. He goes into, let's say, the basement or the underground of somebody's house, and so he's also chayiv misa in the sense that if you're entering into somebody's property at that point in time, there's a halacha that the person whose property you're entering into is allowed to kill you at that point in time. Is considered basically like the status of a rodef. If someone comes to kill, then he could be killed. And so therefore, in this case again, if it's tavcha b'machteres, where in a sense there's a chayiv misa at that moment, but still chayiv, he's still chayiv to pay 4 or 5 times the amount, because with a knas, you still have to pay it even though there's a chayiv misa. Shekvar neschayiv b'geneva, kodem sheyavoli deis or machteres, because the person was already chayiv in paying the geneva part, the mammon part, that was earlier, that was before he came into the machteres. And the machteres only involves the fine, and again, you pay a fine even though there's a chayiv misa. But ganav v'tavach b'machteres, but let's say he did the stealing and the slaughtering in the machteres, so then pater, then he's going to be pater, she'em ein geneva ein tvicha vein mechira, because again, there you're not going to pay the geneva part of the payment, therefore you don't pay the tvicha and the mechira part of the payment as well. These are identical cases over here that Rabbi is saying. One just involves a chiyuv misa of a violation of Shabbos, and the other one involves a chiyuv misa in a machteres. And so what do we need both cases for? And so the Gemara says, with tzricha, we need both cases. The iyash me'in on Shabbos, because if we only had the case of Shabbos, mishum the isura iser olam, because when it comes to Shabbos, that violation is something that goes on forever, meaning he can be prosecuted forever for the fact that he was machal Shabbos, he can be taken to court, and he can get the death penalty. So that is a death penalty that potentially it can be given to him even after the moment passes. Aval machteres, but when it comes to breaking into somebody's house, the isser show, that's just a momentary isser. At that moment, he's chayav misa. But once he gets out of that machteres, he's not chayav misa anymore. So emalos, I'd say maybe that's different, because again, that's not the same level of a chayav misa in that case. And you can go the other way as well. V'iyashmin and machteres, if we only had the case of machteres, mishum de machtarto zuhi hasra aso. Because when it comes to breaking into a machteres, so there, the warning is already there, included in going into the machteres. It's as if you have a warning over there. Aval Shabbos, the boy hasra, but when it comes to violating Shabbos, you will not get the death penalty if you don't get an official warning. You have to get an actual warning in that case. You don't need a warning by machteres, so therefore, again, you would say that by Shabbos, that is a kind of a lower level of a death penalty, so to speak. So Eimalo, so I might say the same halacha doesn't apply on Shabbos. That's why we need to say the case. Tzricha, that's why we need both cases. And Rashi over here explains, Haya gedi ganav lo, ganav gedi bechol. It means, again, he stole this goat, this gedi, on a weekday. V'nes chayev akeren, so he's already chayev to pay the principal. V'tov cho b'Shabbos, and then he goes and he slaughters it on Shabbos. Lo asi alech chiyuva demamun b'isr Shabbos ala chiyav knas. In that case, since only the shechita was on Shabbos, you only have a chiyav knas with the isr Shabbos, with the death penalty. So chayev, again, it's chayev according to exactly what we said before. Chayev daled v'hei, he's chayev 4 or 5 times the amount. The knas chidushu, because a knas is a chidush, and you're chayev even when there's a violation of Shabbos, when there's a death penalty. V'Rabba Sfir like Rebbe Meir, and again, Rabbi here is holding like Rebbe Meir that when it comes to Knas, like we just said, when it comes to Knas, you have to pay. But Ganav v'Tavach b'Shabbos, but if he did the stealing and the slaughtering on Shabbos, the Chiyav Mammon de Karen also aleh b'Isser Shabbos. There, even the Chiyav, the Mammon part, not just the Knas, the Mammon was even with the Isser Shabbos. So there he's patur the Kaimalon ein Mesu Mashalim, because again, we say there's no death penalty and payment. V'Kevan da Karen l'Mechayev Knas nami l'Mashalim. Once you don't pay on the principal, the Mammon part, you don't pay the fine either. The tashlumi dalad v'hei amarachmana v'lo tashlumi shloshav yarba. You have to pay 4 or 5 times the amount, not 3 or 4 times the amount. You got to pay the principal, and in addition to the knas. If you're not paying the principal, you don't pay the knas. V'lo svir lan krebi nasan damar chayno se'asatzmo inami b'kapas. You have to say, according to this, that even stealing involves a violation of Shabbos, which means that either we do not hold like Rabbi Nassan that a living creature carries itself, meaning he's actually carrying over here, and therefore there was a violation of Shabbos. You don't say that the creature carried itself. Or you can say that if it's tied up, even if you hold like Rabbi Nassan, but if the animal is tied up, then it's not going to be no seis atzmo. So again, there's a violation of Shabbos. Again, the same idea. Once you don't pay for the keren, so ein tvicha vein mechir. You're not chayiv the knas. Ein mechayiv knas. Kid pay Rashi. You're not chayiv the knas. Like I explained, says Rashi, the tashlumi arba v'chamisha ksiva lo tashlumi shlosha v'arba. Same drush as before. You pay 4 or 5 times the amount, not 3 or 4 times the amount. Machteres. What does it mean? He goes into the machteres. Means shechosar bayis votzio. Means to say that he goes into the house. He breaks into the house in order to take it out. Again, talking about stealing or shechting in the machteres atzma. The point is, if he's in the machteres when he does the shechita, he himself is chayiv misa at that moment. He have a ashkechei balabayis, meaning if the owner of the house would find him that he broke into his house, he can kill him. That's what the pasuk says. If the balabayis kills him, he's not considered guilty for that. And so then the Gemara said, well, each one has a strength. Mishum the Isure Isser Olam. Shabbos is something that goes on forever, in the sense, Kol Zman She'idu Olav Shechilo Shabbos Yimisu Bezin. Anytime they testify him that he violated Shabbos, even later on, they can testify. There was a Shabbos that he violated, he'd be Chayav Misa. Hilka Chamira Misa Dilala Potro Mimaman. Therefore, you could say the Misa of Shabbos is more stringent, and it's able to pattern from paying Mammon. But then you can also say the Isser Shah, when it comes again, and in contrast, when it comes to the situation of the Machteres, just one moment. If he doesn't find him while he's broken into the property, he can't kill him anymore. And again, the Gemara contrasted the other direction as well. When it comes to the Machteres, no warning is needed, so maybe that's stricter. When it comes to Shabbos, a warning is necessary. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Papa says, Haisa para genuvalo, let's say you have a situation where the cow was already stolen from before Shabbos, V'tavcha b'Shabbos, and he does the slaughtering on Shabbos, Chayev is Chayev, same like we said before, Shekvar is Chayev b'geneva kodem sheyavuli deis Shabbos, because he was already Chayev on the principle before Shabbos, and when it comes to the Kanas, he can be Chayev, even though he's Chayev Misa, he can be Chayev the Kanas as well. Haisa para she'ulalo, now let's say he had a cow that he had borrowed, V'tavcha b'Shabbos, and he slaughters it on Shabbos, of course he's supposed to be returning the cow, Instead he slaughters it, which effectively is stealing it. So in that case, Pater is going to be Pater because the entire Geneva is really being done. The Geneva and the Tvich all happen at the same time. It's happening on Shabbos, and therefore he's Pater on the principle and Pater on the fine as well. And the Gemara says, Amar le Rav Acha brei de Rava le Rav Ashi. So Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, Rav Papa para asal ashminan. Rav Papa saying the same thing we just said before in Rabbah, but instead he's talking about, instead of a gedi, he's talking about a cow. So he's telling us a chiddush that a different animal, would we think a different animal would be any different? What's the chiddush of Rav Papa's statement? It's exactly the same as what Rabbah said. Rabbah said, Haya gedi ganavlo. And again, Rav Papa is saying, Haysa para ganuvalo. So what's the difference between these two things? What is he teaching us? Amar le Rav Papa. So Rav Papa said back to him, She'ula asal ashminan. And you know what Rav Papa is teaching us? It's a chiddush by the case of the borrowing, that the moment of shchita is the moment of the geneva. Why is that a chiddush? Because I might have thought, since Rav Papa said that at the moment you pull the animal, you're chayav to feed that animal, talking about when you borrow, talking about a situation where you borrow an animal. So hachanami, so maybe here also you would say, mishas she'elis, chayav ba'onse, from the moment of the borrowing is when he's really chayav in any onus that happens to this animal, and therefore maybe the moment of geneva is not the moment he shechts it, but already goes back to the moment that he borrowed it. So kamash malan, that's what Rav Papa is saying. No, it's the moment of the shechting that is the moment of stealing, and therefore it's all happening with a violation of Shabbos. And Rashi over here explains, Haisa para she'ulalo v'tavcha b'Shabbos pater. Again, the second case of Rav Papa was where it was a borrowed cow and then he shechts it on Shabbos. That means that the geneva, it's all happening at that time on Shabbos. At that moment that he's shechting it, that is when the gazela is taking place. Mimara from its owner, umiso mamon boin kachar. And again, you have a situation where the violation of Shabbos and the chi of mamon, not talking about knas here, but the chi of mamon for stealing it, happen at the same time. And Rashi points out, v'lo garsin and shemein geneva don't have the girsa over here that if he didn't steal it, he doesn't have to pay the knas of tvicha and mechira, because here when it's a borrowed cow, there is no knas anyway for tvicha. By a borrower, it's not even shayach to pay the double or to pay the 4 or 5 times. Even if a borrower were to subsequently steal it, he doesn't pay 4 or 5 times the amount. You're only chayav in the principle. Even in a situation, let's say, where the show would claim that it was stolen from him, there's still not going to be that payment. You only pay the fine by an actual thief as opposed to a borrower. Or it could also be, let's say you have a shomer chinam, not a borrower, but someone who's watching something for free. There you could also have a chi of knas if it's a case of hapoter atzma betoin tainas ganav. Let's say a shomer chinam were to claim it was stolen, which actually paters a shomer chinam. Then it turns out the shomer chinam was the thief. Sheomer nignav, again, he says it was stolen, but he was the thief. So in that case, the shomer chinam actually would pay a knas. But by a shoel, if a shoel were to shech the animal, it would not be a situation where you pay the knas payment. It's only a mammon payment. And again, the point is, it's the moment of the shchita that is the stealing. So the Gemara says, Para asal ashminan. What, he's teaching us a chiddush that by a cow it's the same as a gedi. What is he teaching us that we didn't learn from the gedi case of Rabbah? And the Gemara answered, no, she'ula asal ashminan. The tovcha b'Shabbos pater. The chiddush is, by a borrowed animal, if he shechts it on Shabbos, he's pater, because the moment, again, of the shchita, that is considered to be the stealing. Because again, Rav Papa said that it's the moment of the Mashiach that he's chayav to feed the animal. So hachanami name a mishas she'ela. Here too, you could say the same idea. From the moment of the borrowing, ram yoleh chi of karen. That's when he has to pay for the principal. Therefore, when he shechts it on Shabbos, maybe we say that the chiyav actually goes back to the moment of borrowing it. Kamash Malona comes to teach us, came in the chalkama the isa hadra be'ena. Since as long as this animal was alive, it can be returned. So he shayed that the katavach la kagazula, the moment of shechting it, that's actually the moment when he's stealing it, and therefore again that happens on Shabbos, and therefore he is pater from the payment. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava, Rava says, Hiniach lehen avi and para she'ula. Let's say you have a situation of orphans who are inheriting their father, and their father leaves them a cow which he had borrowed. So the halacha is, Mishtamshin ba kol yemei she'elta. All of the days of the terms of the borrowing, they're allowed to continue using that cow. In other words, even though the original borrower, the father, has died, but still the sons who inherit the father, they're allowed to use that cow. And so let's say the animal dies, so ein chayav in bone, so they're not chayav in onsim. Only the original shoel is chayav in onus. They are not going to be chayav to pay for this cow if it dies, if there's some kind of onus. And Rav over here continues, Kisvurin shalaviyam. Now let's say they inherit this cow and they don't realize it's borrowed. They think it belongs to their father. V'tavchua v'achlu, and they go ahead and they slaughter it and they eat it. So the halach is mishalmin demei basar bezol. They don't have to pay back the full amount. They pay back the value of the meat when you evaluate it at a reduced rate. And Rashi over here explains, Kol Yemei She'elta, again, they're allowed to use it the entire time of the borrowing. Kol Yemei Meshech Hazman, Shashol Avi and Min HaBailam, whatever amount of time their father borrowed it from the owner, they're allowed to continue to use this para. And Ein Chayav in Bon, so if an onus happens, they're not Chayav, the Inu Lav Shoal and Inu Allah, because they are not really the original borrowers, and therefore they're not Chayav in Onsim. And again, if they, let's say, they don't realize it's borrowed and they slaughter it, so they pay Demei Basar Bezol, they pay the value of the meat at a reduced rate. Kol zuzah chashvinan bi'arba danki, meaning to say every zuz we evaluate as only 4 danki. Hachi amrinan beperak mishameis. That's how we do the evaluation in Baba Basra. Or yachziru lebailam. Again, they ate the meat. The hide is still there. The hide can be returned to the original owner. The idea over there is that they're paying for the benefit that they got, but they don't really have to pay for the damage that they inflicted on the original owner. Because again, they're not responsible at that level. They're only responsible to pay because they ate the meat. They have to pay for that benefit that they got, the Demei Basar Bezol. And finally, Rava says, Hiniach len avi and achrayas nechasim. Now, let's say their father left them property with a lien on it. There was land, and the person who owned this cow had a lien on their property on the land. In that case, chayav and l'shalim. In that case, they do, in fact, have to pay. Rashi over here says, achrayas nechasim karkos. In other words, again, he left them karka, and there's a lien on that property, so then they have to pay. Now, it's unclear, this last line that Rava says, that if he left them property, if he left them achrayas nechasim, so then they have to pay. What's that going on? Is that going on the first case where an onus happens, where we said before they weren't chayiv, now they have to pay? Or is it going on the second part of Rava's statement, when they shechted the animal and they have to pay Demei Basar Bezol, but if there's achrayas nechasim, maybe they have to pay full. And so to that's what the Gemara says. Ika demasni la aresha. Some people say that last line is going on the first case where the para dies ba'ones. Ika demasni la seifa. Some people say it's going on the end case, again where they shechted the animal. And the Gemara explains, Man demasni la aresha. Now the one who says it's going on the first case where it dies ba'ones, so you have to pay if there's a lien, so kol shekein ha-seifa. Certainly it would be going on the seifa as well, where they actually shech the animal. That's even worse than an onus. There they actually go ahead and shech the animal. Certainly they'd have to pay in that case as well if there's a lien on the property. Upliga de Rav Papa, and according to this version, it would argue on what Rav Papa said. And Rashi over here explains, Zika de masni aresha. Some people say again that Rava's statement was going on the resha, meaning lahai hiniach len avi and achrayis nechasim chayav and l'shalim. Again, Rava said that if the father leaves property over that has a lien on it, then they have to pay. That's going on the resha. Ve'amrinan dechayavin ba'onsen, meaning in a situation where the animal dies ba'ones, they're going to have to pay for that onus. Tishtabin nechasim davu and mechayim mishas she'elan. The point is, if that's what you're going to say, it means that the lien already takes place from the time the father was alive, from the time of the actual borrowing, when the borrowing took place. And kol shekein ha-seifa, certainly at the end where they shecht it, kishetavchua v'achlua, when they shecht the animal and they eat the animal, certainly they're going to have to pay in that case. Upliga de Rav Papa, and according to that version, this would argue on Rav Papa before. D'Amar le'el, because Rav Papa said earlier, Ahi shaita dematu la'onsin hu da'asi chiyuv oleh. Rav Papa said it's the moment that the onus happens that the chiyuv takes place. V'lo mishash she'ela, not from the moment of borrowing it, but here we're saying no. Masni la'aresha, we're saying that in a situation of an onus, but if there's a lien on the property, they have to pay, because again, the chiyuv comes all the way from the moment of the original borrowing. That's the first version. Uman de masni la'seifa, but the Gemara says the one who says that this line, when there's achrayas you have to pay, is going on the seifa, meaning on the case where they shecht it, aval aresha lo, but on the resha that would not be the case. In a situation of onus, they would not have to pay, because we're going to say that the chiyuv only takes place at the time of the onus, v'hainu de Rav Papa, and that's exactly what Rav Papa said earlier. Rashi over here says, v'ika demasni la'seifa, heicha de tavchua, meaning again, if they shech the animal, so im hiniach len avi and So if the father left property with a lien on it, they have to pay a full payment. They can't get away with the reduced payment. Because again, they should have checked and made sure that this was actually their father's property and not borrowed. Therefore, it's their fault, their maisa, they're doing something wrong, and they have to pay. But in the first case where it was just an onus, in Mesa where it dies, they don't have to pay. We don't say there's a lien going all the way from the time of the borrowing. No, the chiyuv comes right now when the onus happens, and since the father's not alive, they're not chayiv. And that's what Rapapa, Damar Le'el, that's what Rapapa said earlier. We don't say that it's from the time of the borrowing that the payment takes place, the chiyuv for the payment. It's the moment the onus happens that we say that the payment, that there's a chiyuv to pay. And again, in this case, the original borrower, the father's not alive anymore at the moment of the onus, and therefore they do not have to pay. And the Gemara now returns to the original question we had from our Mishnah here in Kesubos to the Mishnah in Makos. Again, the original question was that over here in our Mishnah in Kesubos it says that if you have a situation of onus, let's say you have a situation of rape where there would be a punishment of lashes, but you're still going to pay the fine, you're still going to pay that onus payment. Whereas it says again in Mesechet Makos you get lashes, and presumably if you get lashes, you're not going to pay the payment. And so Rabbi Yochanan had answered that the difference is that over here there was no warning for Malchus, and since there was no warning for Malchus, there is no Malchus, and that's why you pay. And Reish Lakish, he had a different approach. Reish Lakish said that our Mishnah follows the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds Loka Meshalim, you can get Malchus and you can also pay. And so the Gemara now says, Bishlomer Rabbi Yochanan Lomer Reish Lakish. I understand why Rabbi Yochanan doesn't follow Reish Lakish. The Kamukim Lak Rabbanan, he'd rather say the Mishnah in Kesubos follows the Rabbanan and not Rabbi Meir's opinion of Loka Meshalim. Ela Reish Lakish, but according to Reish Lakish, my time, Lomer Rabbi Yochanan, why doesn't he say simply like Rabbi Yochanan that the case of our Mishnah over here in Kesubos is there was no warning for Malchus, and therefore a simple answer, there's no Malchus, that's why you pay. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Lach, Reish Lakish will say back to you, Kevon di ilu asru be pater, since if they would have given a warning for Malchus, you're agreeing that the person would be pater from paying, so kilo asru be nami pater, even if there was no warning, you are pater from paying, even if there's just a theoretical possibility of Malchus, that's enough to pater from Mammon, according to Reish Lakish. And the Gemara says, V'azu l'tay mayu, in this machlokas here, Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, whether even a theoretical chiyuv of Malchus is enough to pater from Tashlumin, that is a machlokas we find elsewhere. The Chiasi Rav Dimi, because when Rav Dimi came, Amar, he said, Chayve Misa Shogegin. Let's say you have a case where a person is Chayiv Misa, but he only does it b'Shogeg, so there really is no Chayiv Misa. The Chayve Malki is Shogegin, or similarly, let's say it's a case where you would have been Chayiv Malchus, but you did it b'Shogeg, so there is no Chayiv Malchus, Vidavar Acher, and something else, meaning a monetary payment, meaning in a situation where you're not actually getting the Malchus, where it's just theoretical, do you have to have the monetary payment? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayiv, Rabbi Yochanan says, yes, you're Chayiv the monetary payment. If you're not actually getting the Malchus, you have to pay the money. Reish Lakish Amar Pater, and Reish Lakish says, no, even the fact that in theory you could have gotten Malchus, that is enough to say Pater. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayiv, Rabbi Yochanan says Chayiv, Dalo Asrubei, because again, there was no warning here, there's no Malchus over here, so therefore you have to pay the money. Reish Lakish Amar Pater, Reish Lakish says Pater, Kevon di ilu Asrubei Pater, since in theory if he would have been warned, and it would have been bemazed, he would have been Pater from paying because he would have had Malchus, so Kilo Asrubei Nami Pater, so when there's no warning as well, you're going to be Pater. And Rashi over here explains, Bishlomer Rabbi Yochanan Demuki Masnisan Bishlo Hisrabo. I understand Rabbi Yochanan, he says that our mission is talking where there was no warning. Lo Amar Reish Lakish Duk Meir Rabbi Meir. He doesn't want to say like Reish Lakish, because Reish Lakish, he said like Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yochanan would rather say our Mishnah follows the Rabbanan. Kilo Asr Beinami Pater. Then the Gemara said, according to Reish Lakish, even without a warning, you're Pater from Tashlum and Hoel Vikatzad Malchus, since there's this theoretical possibility that Malchus could be given. Shogegin Shalo Hisru Behan Shogeg means to say there was no warning, so it was done by mistake. V'davar acher and mammon, and when you have another situation, in other words, you have malchus and mammon, but there's no actual malchus because it was shogeg, there was no warning. V'akula milsaka, it's going on everything. Kalamar chayve misa shogeg inu mammon, or chayve malchus shogeg inu mammon. Whether you have a situation of a chiyav misa that was b'shogeg with mammon, or a chiyav malchus that was b'shogeg with mammon. So again, that's a machlokas Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan Omer chayev b'tashlum, and Rabbi Yochanan says he's chayev to pay. To halo asr because there was no warning. Ve'enatam mechayev el misham Risho Achas to Mammon. So therefore, if there's no warning, there's no Malka, so all you have is Mammon, so you pay the Mammon. Kilo Asr Bein Nami Pater, but again, Reish Lakish says even without a warning, you're still going to be Pater from Mammon, Ulakamon Yolef Taima. Later on, we're going to learn out the reason for this. And the Gemara continues and says, Eisvei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Now Reish Lakish asks Rabbi Yochanan a question on his position. V'lo yeh asan ano she'yanesh. Again, this is the pasuk talking about where you have two people that are arguing, and then it turns out that they injure a woman who's pregnant. Let's say that woman does not die, so the pasuk says ano she'yanesh. There has to be a monetary payment for the miscarriage, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph.